So I definitely would advise you to ask questions using the chat. As you can see, my eyes are directly absorbed by the chat, so I will stop and try to answer on the fly if I can. And then if not, then I will try to answer that a bit later. All right, so I'm actually getting connected with my tablet. One thing that I would like to share is that CTO is a title that can mean very different jobs depending on the size of the company and the size of the team. There are also different flavors of CTOs, CTOs that are more R&D focused, and CTOs that are more executive focused. But in any cases, there seems to be a very strong persona, CTO persona, when a company reaches unicorn status, which is basically $1 billion and more valuation, and the road to IPO, which is one of the reasons you would like to start a startup at some point, which is have a liquidity event, whether it is IPO or not, to increase your wealth. So the first, let's start from zero, and then we'll grow. The first, you know what? Hold on, let me share that. It's going to be way more interesting to share my screen. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, cool. So what you see here is the growth framework for the CTO. So based on all the CTOs and engineering leaders I've worked with, I realized that there were 4 different CTOs depending on either the number of engineers in the team or the amount of revenue the company is generating. The number of CTO personas that I've identified are the maker, the expert, the manager, and the executive. So what I would like to do is obviously go through one by one, and then answer your questions along the way. So basically, when you're the founding CTO, so you join a startup company from day 0. You join a startup company from day 0, so you're the maker. What's expected from you is to build a product, or more precisely, to reach product market fit. So to build enough products so that there is a fit between a product at some point and users, or enough of a fit to justify charging money or raising funding. So what does that mean? That means that at this stage, the CTO is has definitely 2 hands. One hand on the keyboard to code, and another hand on the product to either interact directly with users or to interact with the other founders and partners in the company that are talking to users. So Ben has a very interesting question. Is it assumed that the CTO is a founder? What I've seen is that in the vast majority of cases, when the CTO joins the company from day 0, when there is no product, he's a founder, or at least he's negotiating, or sorry, I'm using the pronoun he. They're negotiating enough equity to make it interesting, because usually startup founders have very little money and capital, so they basically trade smoke and mirror, equity against work. What I've seen, and very interestingly, what I've seen in the fintech space is a lot of founders that are usually in their mid-30s to 40s, coming from a banking or finance background, have some capital, and then they hire either an outsourcing firm or a freelancer to build the first product. So yeah, if you look at the list of unicorns, especially in Europe, you would see that a lot of the fintech unicorns don't have a founding CTO. They have CTOs now, but they didn't have a founding CTO. The founding CEO, who actually had the problem as a user, went through an agency or a freelancer to build the first version of the product, and then when they raised funding, went on to hire developers and engineering leadership. But in the vast majority of cases, when there is a CTO in a startup pre-product market fit, they're a founder. And that founding CTO would be spending a lot of time building a product. So usually at that stage, the responsibilities of the CTO are mainly product market fit. So scalability of the platform, the beauty of the code, even the quality of the product is not very important, because we all know that the most features actually will go to trash. So it is commonly accepted that this is a period where you will be amassing tech debt, which makes sense, because the same way a company would go and raise funding, which is moral debt, or actually get a loan, which is a debt, financial debt. Well, you are actually building technical debt because you need debt to move fast. So it's okay as long as you keep that in mind. So roles and responsibilities for the maker, the CTO, the founding CTO, product market fit, and build code as fast as possible to put products in the hands of potential users, to validate the assumptions and iterate very quickly. Do you have any questions at that stage? Cool. So basically, if we so the percentage here are obviously estimation, but it's estimated that at this stage the CTO would spend almost 75% of their time, 70% of their time coding, and then the rest taking care of some backlog, talking to users, and talking to other co-founders and developers, if any. One thing that I won't stress enough is that usually the CTOs that were able to move more easily to the next level, the one that I'm going to present right now, were the one that spent a good amount of time talking to users. So if you don't like talking to human beings, or if the CTOs that you interact with don't like talking to human beings, I think it's time to start, because that allows the CTO to build more empathy towards users and to actually be able to diffuse that within their teams when they're going to start building it. Now, let's move to the next level. So everything is, oh, let me see the question. So the question, should the CTO be subject expertise, or he can be one who can understand technical aspect? What I've seen, it's a great question. So what I've seen is that it doesn't really matter if the CTO is a strong expert in, I don't know, backend development or app development, or even something that is more deep. As long as they're able to understand the topics. Interestingly, the more technical the founding CTO is, the more difficult it is to start delegating and scaling the team. Well, I've interacted with startup CTOs that were average developers, And as soon as they got funding, they hired people that were so much better than them, that allowed them to actually scale. So it's much easier to have a less technical expert as a CTO, because it's easier for them to replace themselves, because they already know that they're bad. So well, if you are, the CTO is a very strong expert, they have a very high standard in terms of replacement. And what I've seen is that usually they try to scale themselves or delegate all the things that they don't like doing, like front end, app development, database, SRE, etc., and they keep the back end for them, because it's like, it's my precious, right? And I've seen startups that went up to the Series B, so with more than 20 engineers in the team, where the CTO was still like the only person coding on the back end, which is like a huge danger for the company at this stage. So it's counterintuitive, but it doesn't. The CTO doesn't have to be like this very big expert, unless, of course, the startup itself is selling a very tech product. But I'll get to that. Now, let's talk about the second level. The second level is the expert. So everything is going according to plan. The startup found their product market fit and managed to either raise the first round of funding or is already generating revenue, which is great. Now, there is enough money to hire engineers. So at this stage, the CTO has between 5 to 15 engineers in their team. So that means that they're supposedly gonna spend less time building the product and more time making themselves dispensable to the engineering team. Because usually the bottleneck at this point is because the CTO was the first developer. So they took shortcuts. They wrote few to little comments. Obviously, there was no documentation, because why the hell would we write a documentation for something that we're gonna put to the trash in 2 days? Doesn't make sense. So a lot of the valuable information about the system are in the CTO's head. And it's obviously more efficient to just answer the questions as they come. So usually the trap that CTOs fall into at that stage is the CTO as DNS server. So all the new developers come in the team, they're like ping, 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 and the CTO is like answer, 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 answer. And of course, it's fast, it's efficient. And when there are, I don't know, 6, 7 developers in the team, it looks fine. The problem is that it doesn't scale at all. And it makes the CTO a single point of failure. So the smart CTO would actually start at this time writing down things. And what I've seen is that especially the remote first companies, the ones that are asynchronous and try to write down instead of meet, they usually are better equipped to do that, because, well, if they want to interact with each other, they have to write things down. And if you write things down, well, it scales. If you look at, I don't know, the religions, the religion that actually managed to scale, well, the ones that had books. So the written, the written information, all the oral tradition religion actually have disappeared or did not scale. So if you want to scale, you have to write things down. And that's usually the time where you can write things down, either through commenting code, or documenting and creating processes. Obviously, that's also the time where CTOs will spend some time hiring. And it's also a tricky period, because they're going to choose the founding developers, so the first employees. And it's very, very important to choose them right, because the first hires actually set the tone for the rest. And usually it's very tempting to go and hire junior developers at this stage, because they're, well, less expensive. And quote unquote less expensive, because we all know how much a developer costs these days in any country in the world. But the trap here is that when you have too many junior developers, you have to spend a lot of time upskilling them and training them. So that's more time for the CTO not spent on the product. And the reality is that because business is growing, the CTO will have to spend time on the code because there is always some new feature to release for yesterday. So basically what will happen is that the junior developers will be a little bit left on their own. Hopefully they will pick up skills and information on their own. No, they won't. And the CTO will always be like back to back in meetings and trying to get things done. And usually that's there is a high probability of burnout at this stage, because what I've seen is a lot of CTOs catch up with codes during nights and weekends. So Ben has a very good question. What's the relationship with the other engineers at this stage? So what I've seen is that usually CTOs like to keep things relaxed at this stage. So when you have less than 10 team members, you don't really have to have a hierarchy. Now, the trick is, it could seem that you could actually continue without formal managerial structure, or more precisely organizational structure, because especially if you work with senior engineers, you don't need to spend a lot of time with them. You tell them, here's what I want, and they will build it. If you have junior people, it's more tricky and you have to spend time with them. Now, in all cases, and that's my opinion here, not an industry best practice, but my opinion here is that if you are C-level, you're the boss, period. And because even if you don't want to consider yourself like that, the team members will. And that's something that is really, really important to consider here, is that team members actually know very well that you're the boss. And anyway, you have more capital than them. You have more equity. So capitalistically speaking, you're the boss. And we do live in a capitalistic world. So hey, here it is. And you do want to embody that. So obviously what you don't want to be is the micromanaging annoying boss. Don't be that guy. What you would like to be is someone who actually supports engineers to do their very best, either through information sharing or through informal discussion that are called one-on-one, and that I will detail in the next level. But at this stage, no need to actually have management in place and so far. But don't forget that you're the leader of the team and you're the boss, and you set the vision, and you actually are the reason why people work in the company. You're not their friends and you're not their peers. You're the leader of the team. And yeah, unfortunately, it's completely possible to be the leader of a team where everyone is older than you and more experienced than you. It's okay. If they join the company, they know you're younger and they know you're less experienced, but they have a reason why you, there is a reason why they joined. So use that. Now, moving to the next level, the manager. So everything is still going well. Now the company is reaching multiple millions of revenue and is just raised a Series B, or is about to raise a Series B. We don't really know the amounts these days. But in terms of team, that's usually the time where the team goes beyond 15 engineers and up to 50 engineers. So at this stage, the CTO is actually in charge of organizational design and spends more and more time being involved in C-level activities like board meetings, some eventually sales presentation, discussion with product, and so on. And there is a new shift, again, a new shift in the CTO's role, which is to stop being an enabler of other and start being a strategic person, more strategic. So basically, that's usually the time where CTOs hire a VP of engineering to help them manage the developers on a day-to-day basis so they can focus on the strategy and the long term. Now, I'm sure that you would be curious to know what should be the relationship between a CTO and a VP of engineering. And the example I like to use is actually the difference between the president and the prime minister in France. So for those of you who don't know the politics of France, you have actually a clear separation of powers between the president and the prime minister. And usually the president is in charge of the vision, is in charge of external relations, and is basically the leader of the country. While the prime minister is in charge of the execution. So the prime minister is the one who actually manages the ministers, is in relationship with the parliament, and is in charge of the strategies to achieve the president's vision. And that actually is the main relationship I see in the market between CTOs and VPs of engineering. So the CTO would be in charge of the vision, in charge of the long-term strategy, and he's the leader of the organization. So he's the face of the company to the outside world and to customers and investors. So to answer Ben's question about working on strategy, what does that mean? So there is a common misconception about the relationship between product and engineering. So if you talk to product people, they would tell you that engineering is about executing the product vision. So product people, so the way it works is that the company comes up with objectives, financial objectives. Then product comes up with a roadmap with assumptions on how to achieve those objectives. And then engineering is supposed to execute the roadmap. And that doesn't work. At least in all the companies where it works like that, you have such tension between engineering and product and sales that everyone actually walks on each other's toes, and it makes a very, very difficult environment, and actually one of the main reasons companies can't scale. How they can scale is to have a technological vision that goes beyond just executing the roadmap. So at this stage, the CTO is aware of the objectives. So you've raised funding. So you do know as the CTO the sales objectives, and you're supposed to translate that into platform scalability. You're supposed to translate that into hiring plan. You're supposed to translate that into technological bets, if any. So that's the strategic part. The strategic is about, okay, what should I do, technologically speaking, to achieve the numbers that is not necessarily directly related with the roadmap? Mike has a question. What are the chances that I will be as good in early phases as in the others? So it's a great question, Mike. What I've seen is that you all have the ability to do that as long as you're okay for your job to change. So said differently, the major blocker for a CTO to scale themselves is themselves. Why? Because if you you enjoy a lot coding, then you will have a lot of trouble actually scaling yourself to the next level, because you want to stay in the code. But if you stay in the code, then you don't spend time hiring team members and selecting them and transferring information to them, making yourself dispensable. If so let me go back. So you from the maker to the expert. Then if you scale yourself as the expert, and then the company is growing, and you like actually be the one where to whom everyone asks questions. So to feel that rush, and I know some CTOs like that. So they are like, they slack faster than their shadow. So like, and they're always like super quick in answering team members' questions on Slack, and they think that it's your job. And no, I understand the feeling, but that actually a very, very good way to not scale yourself. So again, at this stage, you have to accept that your job is not anymore to answer questions. You should have transferred all the information to team members, and you have to manage them. On the management part, so what's interesting is that you are designing human systems instead of designing computer systems. So it's the same activity, but with different systems, as complex as each other. And again, the difficulty here is, are you willing to do the changes in terms of skills and behaviors to change job? So what helps is for you to be aware of that, to be aware that, especially when you're in high growth, that you'll have to fire yourself every 6 months, more or less. So if you know from the start that every 6 months you have a plan to fire yourself to other people or people that you will hire, then it makes the transition easier. There was another question. Yeah, from Satyam. So in managerial level, if you hire someone in team who's more expert than technology, how do you maintain relationship with him in front of other team members? So that's something that I see very often, which is the imposter syndrome. So so a CTO starts managing people that that have expertise in topics that they don't know anything about, and feel that because they're not the biggest expert in the team, they can't manage them. Fortunately for me, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. You don't have to be more expert than the person you're managing or coaching to help them. And that's the beauty of it. So when you reach the management level, the levers you're going to pull are different. So the manager's mission is to set and achieve team objectives by enabling individual team members to do their very best. So as a manager, to enable individual team members to do their very best, you have to identify where they can improve. You have to work with them on setting a development plan for them to improve. And you have to sit down with them and coach them and try to help them unblock what's preventing them to give their very best or to be as happy as possible in their environment. And that's mainly your job as a manager. It doesn't mean that you should not be technical anymore. You should definitely do, and that's why actually here I have kept around 10% of the manager's time to bug fixing or technology watch or code review or whatever actually helps the CTO keep some kind of expertise, but you don't have to be the biggest expert to build a great team. Actually, the best leaders in the world are not the best experts. They are the ones who manage to have incredible, talented people to work for them. Which brings me to the last level, the executive. So that's the level you reach when you are unicorn status and or going to that level. So you at this stage, the CTO has more than 50 engineers in their team, and they're basically mainly an executive. At this stage, there is a joke I like, which is, you know, the difference between a CTO and a CFO is one letter. So that means that 2/3 of the job should be the same. So when you've reached that level as an executive, your job is mainly to prepare the company for the next level, share visions and strategies to your team, talk at industry events and to investors, and make sure that everything goes well according to plan. Because at the end, as the leader, you're the one to blame. So obviously that's the stage that I will talk less, because it's again a very different job and a very executive job. But what I've seen is that there are some exceptions to that. So for example, there is a tech company called Algolia. So they're a unicorn, and the CTO is still the founding CTO, and he's a super technical guy who actually is in charge of R&D. So he's actually very in charge of the technical vision, but it's a very technical product, so that makes sense, and has delegated a lot of the processes and the business to his VP of engineering. But usually what I see in the market is that the CTO is really the one doing a lot of the business interactions and making sure that everything goes well according to plan in their team. So at this stage, what's the difference between CEO and CTO? There is very little difference. That's a great question. It's really a matter of departments. So at this stage, the board meetings actually gather people that are really minded in the same way. They are just in charge of different departments. So there is very little difference between the CFO and the CMO and the CTO. The CEO being the one making sure that everyone actually work well together, and is in charge of like the financial future of the company, and making sure that he's spreading out the gospel of the company. But there is very little difference. So at this stage, the CTO is really some kind of a CEO. So acts a lot like a CEO. So meetings and conferences and key hiring and coaching people that are coaching managers who are actually coaching developers, but on the technology side. So that was a real quick overview on what how a CTO evolves at the same time as the startup, and the different roles and responsibilities at every stage. Obviously, this is a model. So everyone has their style, and there are very different flavors of CTOs out there. But what I'm showing you is actually the most probable way of scaling yourself as a CTO and reach those kind of levels. There are exceptions, but the exceptions are, as I said, exceptions, and usually CTOs manage to scale themselves as experts to transfer information to team members and hire key first hires, and then they scale themselves as manager to manage the team, and then hire a VP of engineering and engineering managers and become executive. So that's the typical path, and actually that's the more probable path to scale yourself than the seed, the funding framework that I've actually borrowed for that model. Any other questions, guys? Cool. So I really hope that I was able to gather everyone that was supposed to attend from LinkedIn. If you have any questions, you can ping me directly on LinkedIn or by email. So let me send you my email address, daniel@unicorncto.com. And if you know anyone who would be interested in getting help, either as a CTO or manager, actually running 2 programs this summer, the Unicorn CTO program and the Unicorn Engineering Manager program. So do spread the word. I'm counting on you. Thank you very much, everyone. And I wish you a very good end of day or day for those of you who are on the West Coast. Cheers. Bye-bye.